Let's begin. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn, check. Here are the checks. Rook takes pawn, check. Queen to c6, check. The answer is rook to b4, f6. Rook takes bishop. One more. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are rook takes rook, check. Checks in this position are rook takes rook, check. Rook to b2, check. The answer is rook takes rook, check. King takes rook, g5, h2. King to g2, c5, g6. Promotes to queen, check. King takes queen, c4, g7. Let us go to the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. King takes knight. Checks in puzzle position are rook to h8, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. King takes knight. Queen takes pawn, check. King to d3. Another puzzle. The threats are knight takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. Knight to d3, check. Knight to a2, check. The best move in puzzle position is knight to a2, check. King to d1. Rook takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Another puzzle. Threats in this position are rook takes pawn, check. Rook takes bishop. Here are checks in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn, check. The answer is rook takes bishop. Rook to a2, check. King to h1. Another one. Threats in puzzle position are bishop takes pawn, check. Queen takes bishop. Queen takes knight. The checks are bishop takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is queen takes knight. Next puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are bishop takes knight, check. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes bishop. Pawn takes bishop. Bishop takes bishop. The checks are bishop takes knight, check. Solution to the puzzle is bishop takes knight, check. Pawn takes bishop. Bishop takes bishop. One more. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Rook takes queen. Bishop takes pawn. Pawn takes bishop. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Rook takes pawn, check. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn, check. The puzzle is solved using rook takes queen. Rook takes rook. Pawn takes bishop. Another puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Rook takes rook, check. The checks are queen to g6, check. Queen to h7, check. Rook takes rook, check. The puzzle is solved using queen to g6, check. Queen to g7. Queen takes bishop, check. Another puzzle. The threats are queen takes pawn. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes bishop. Queen takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Rook takes rook. Checks in this position are queen to d8, check. Queen takes rook, check. The answer is queen to d8, check. Rook to g8. Queen takes rook, checkmate. One more. The threats are queen takes bishop. Rook takes bishop. Here are the checks. Queen to g5, check. Queen to g3, check. Queen to f2, check. Queen to e1, check. Queen to g4, check. Rook to g2, check. Rook to c1, check. The answer is queen to f2, check. King to h1. Queen to h2, checkmate. Next puzzle. Threats in this position are there are no threats in this position. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. g5, check. Rook to g4, check. The answer is g5, check. Pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn, checkmate. Next puzzle. Here are the threats. Rook takes rook. There are no checks in this position. Answer to this puzzle is rook takes rook. Queen takes rook, check. King to h7. Queen to c8. a2. Queen takes pawn. Promotes to queen. Let us go to the next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Pawn takes pawn. Knight takes pawn, check. Knight takes pawn, check. Checks in this position are rook to f3, check. Knight to e6, check. Knight to f7, check. Knight takes pawn, check. Knight to f3, check. Knight takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is knight to f3, check. King to f2. Knight to d4, check. Next, let us look at threats in puzzle position. Knight takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Queen takes knight, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn. Checks in this position are knight to f3, check. Knight to e2, check. Queen to g4, check. Queen takes knight, check. Queen to g2, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen to g3, check. Solution to the puzzle is h5. Bishop to e3. Knight to g4. Queen takes knight. Pawn takes queen. Next puzzle, threats in puzzle position are rook takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes rook. Rook takes pawn. Checks in this position are knight to e7, check. Knight to f6, check. Answer to this puzzle is knight to e7, check. Rook takes knight. Rook to a8. Queen to f8. Rook takes queen, check. Let's see the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Rook takes rook, check. Rook takes rook. Queen takes pawn. The checks are rook takes rook, check. Answer to this puzzle is rook takes rook. Rook takes rook. Rook to d8, check. Rook takes rook. Queen takes queen. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are rook takes bishop. Rook takes bishop. Pawn takes queen. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is pawn takes queen. Bishop to d4. Rook takes bishop. Another puzzle. The threats are pawn takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Bishop takes knight. Queen takes knight. Checks in puzzle position are queen to g4, check. The best move in puzzle position is rook to a2. Queen takes rook. Knight takes queen. Knight takes bishop. Queen takes knight. Next, the threats are rook takes knight. Here are checks in puzzle position. Rook to c7, check. Bishop to e7, check. Answer to this puzzle is rook to c7, check. King to b5. Rook takes bishop. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are queen takes knight, check. The checks are queen takes knight, check. The best move in puzzle position is f3, f5. Pawn takes knight. Another puzzle. Threats in this position are knight takes pawn. Queen takes bishop. Queen takes queen. Bishop takes rook. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using queen takes queen. Rook takes queen. Bishop takes rook. Next, the threats are queen takes rook. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes knight. Queen takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Rook takes queen. The checks are queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen takes rook, check. Rook takes queen. Rook takes queen. One more. The threats are there are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is knight to e6. Next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Queen takes knight. Bishop takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is f5. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes queen. Knight takes queen. King takes knight. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.